Robert Scott Bell.
This hour on the Robert Scott Bell Show, we are going to put something on trial that belongs to be on trial, and it's not the people who are claimed to have HIV and have unprotected sex. It's the HIV tests themselves. And we got the guy who's put them on trial, inadvertently or purposefully. We're going to find out. His name is Clark Baker. I've had him on the Robert Scott Bell Show many times over the years, so hopefully you know him and love him like we do here. Also, Liam Sheff, the conspiracy realist and investigative journalist here, is also in studio as we talk to Clark Baker from the Office of Medical and Scientific Justice, OMSJ.
We got a theme song. Hold on.
Do we?
Dun, 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 dun. Clark Baker, PI.
Clark Baker, he is the PI. He was, U.S. Marine. Was at the Los Angeles County police officer and
detective.
Yep, and a whistleblower. Found out what it was like to blow the whistle and then get canned, and then find his way back in through the courts and get exonerated. And Clark, we appreciate you so much. Thanks for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
So where did the idea come from that we need to put the HIV test on trial? Because there are a lot of people that have been brought up on charges of, and we're not talking about often the nicest people in the world here, but are they really criminals if they've been tested positive on an HIV test and then suddenly they're accused of a potential murder? I mean, just by having sex.
Well, I didn't just come up with the idea of putting HIV tests on trial. As you remember, I wrote a report in 2008 that we've talked about, Gallows Egg.
Gallows Egg, yes.
And in which I looked at allegations against Peter Duesberg and Celia Farber. And during that investigation, I found a whole bunch of inconsistencies between the marketing and what the National Institutes of Health and the CDC were putting out, and reality. And so I made a lot of attempts to contact people at the NIH and CDC. Unfortunately, when you write to them, and any of your listeners can verify this themselves, when you write to them, you won't get a response from the NIH or the CDC. You get a response from marketing organizations that have no responsibility regarding the veracity of what they have to say.
Regarding the facts, in other words.
Regarding other facts. And they can lie. And they're authorized to lie because they're just marketing people. And the CDC and the NIH has disclaimers on their websites that say, don't believe anything that we say or write. State.
Clark, yesterday I was covering on the Robert Scott Bell Show here a story about the government wanting to basically be able to lie to deny Freedom of Information Act requests. Not to say that, well, here you can have it, we'll redact it, but we can actually tell you that something doesn't exist that does exist. So, this is not without precedent that the government and government agencies would do this.
I'm surprised that they would admit it. That they want the right to lie to the American public. I now, as a Marine and LA cop, I'm amazed that I'm no longer amazed that the U.S. government is willing to lie to the public. What I'm amazed by is their willingness to admit that they want the right to lie to the American public. And so all of these things are the reasons why I wanted to compel people from the CDC and the NIH to tell the truth under oath. But when you subpoena them, they stonewall your subpoenas and they make it extremely difficult to get them to testify. So I decided that the best way to get them to testify is in criminal cases where we compel prosecutors to produce an expert who will testify under oath under penalty of perjury.
Key. That is so brilliant. And Liam, you've been talking about these HIV tests for years, how ripe with, how fraudulent, in fact, that they are.
In 2002, I started investigating this AIDS paradigm. Now, I'd been exposed to the trouble with it in 1993 or so when I studied my macrobiotics with my mentor, Jim Cowella, and he was cooking for the AIDS and cancer group or whatever, HIV positive and cancer group. And I saw all kinds of people being healthy and doing fine. They weren't taking AZT like all their brethren and dropping dead like flies after 3 weeks in a hot car or something like that. They were doing okay. They were a little upset because they weren't drinking coffee and eating sugar, but besides that, they weren't dead and they weren't getting sick. So I'd been aware for a long time there's something wrong with the AIDS thing, but it was only in 2001 or so when a friend told me that it was really a bigger farce than I thought. And I actually got angry and said that he was more or less a denialist, and I said, I'm going to crush you. I'm going to go do the research and prove you wrong. Anyway, that's how I got into it. So I came at it trying to prove the mainstream right in some fashion, even though I thought it was a treatable thing that you could live with and get better with.
Right.
I still was trying to I still didn't know how deep it went. I started researching it, and I read the British Medical Journal Rapid Responses. There are a couple of articles that went up in 2000 and something like that, and they were on the spread of HIV and all this kind of stuff among Aboriginals. And a guy called David Rasnick, who's a doctor, a researcher, a chemist who you've had on the show many times, and a great defender of people's right not to take these HIV tests, was responding. And he said, by the way, he wrote, and you can read this, BMJ Rapid Responses, he wrote, HIV tests are the Achilles heel of AIDS Inc. And I looked at that, and I focused in on that, and I thought, wow, that makes sense. In other words, you're telling people they have something that they don't actually have. If you can convince them that they have it, then you can drug them to death and so on and so forth. So I made my business the business of looking into HIV testing, and I unraveled it and unrolled it. I wrote a bunch of articles. I tried to explain it to the public. A lot of people got it. A lot of people attacked me. You can still Google my name, you find people attacking me who clearly are pharma-funded goons and hacks and sort of announce themselves as, oh, yes, I'm a very important doctor, and I'm attacking this person for pointing out the medical literature. The medical literature has been clear that HIV tests neither have standards, nor are reproducible, nor have any clinical meaning, nor indicate that somebody's infected with any particular thing, no show progression to AIDS. They are very clear that AIDS is a clinical diagnosis. In other words, you walk into the clinic and the doctor says you have AIDS. It doesn't matter what your test result says, that they are reliant on risk groups. In other words, they're profiling. So I did my best to give this information to the so-called dissident community, and unfortunately, I found some people receptive, and I found some people sort of wed to the idea that they had disproved that HIV caused AIDS. And I said, good luck, because you can't disprove something. You can't disprove that kittens rule the world. I mean, we can have this discussion.
Well, it seems, Liam, I mean, to be as simple and straightforward as you are in this case, and as Clark is able to relate within the criminal proceedings here, and maybe even the civil cases we'll talk about, that if you cannot have, let's say, a valid test, whether it determines the presence or absence of anything, much less as a diagnostic, which, according to the journals, according to the very inserts on these so-called tests that the FDA, quote-unquote, approves, does not approve to determine whether HIV is even present, how then do you go to argue that HIV does or does not cause anything?
Well, that's where Clark and the OMSJ took all of that information, deepened it, made it clear, and brought it to the attention of prosecutors, because I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a PI and I don't have the reach that Clark has. So Clark, all on his own over there, typing away, decided to get in touch with his people, investigators, prosecutors, and he made all of this testing research, which they've, I think, streamlined in some fashion or even bulked up so that it's presentable in court. There was a lot of good stuff out there, but now it's in a couple of PDFs, and it's presentable. And if you work with the OMSJ, if you have a client who's been tested HIV positive, you can work with the OMSJ to get those charges challenged. And I want to throw it back to Clark about the success that they've had in 34 cases.
Yeah, this is sensational, Clark. Go ahead.
Well, we've had more than 34 cases. I think now we're somewhere around 100 cases that we're involved in since the beginning. The 34 cases are the cases in which we contacted defense attorneys and we provided them with sufficient information to contact the prosecutor and let the prosecutor know that they had a defendable case.
Okay.
there are a few attorneys that we contacted who refused to have anything to do with us, and they compromised their cases either accidentally or deliberately, and it resulted in cases. It resulted in convictions.
Sure,
where
but
people went to prison.
It seems that if the defendants knew about that, they could go after their own attorneys for incompetent defense.
But
absolutely. The only problem is that when you have a client like David Gutierrez, who was in solitary confinement at an Air Force brig,
it's going to be difficult to challenge, isn't it, from that position?
The lion at the gate is is their attorney, and if the attorney refuses, then there's nothing you can do until after he's convicted.
Yeah, you're SOL at that point. Yeah,
but 34 defense attorneys took the risk.
Yeah, 34 took it. Yeah.
Absolutely. 34 attorneys who did take the risk, in varying degrees, they either secured a remarkable plea bargain or all of the HIV-related charges were dismissed.
So take a pause at this point. Now, we've been told for 30 years approximately that the end of the world is the HIV virus, and it's you know you have it by taking an HIV test. So you'd expect that this is essentially a murder weapon. So you walk into a court, you're accused of spreading it, and we'll get into some of the cases after the break. You're actually accused of spreading it, as some of these people are. You walk in, the defense team brings to light all of the information about HIV tests. Now, you'd think that this is so true and this is so deadly that they're just going to go to prison for the end of till the end of their lives, maybe get a death sentence. What happens instead is all HIV-related charges are dropped. Now, these aren't sterling. Some of these guys are not great guys. Maybe they did have sex with a minor. Maybe they did have some. They did do something.
Yeah, we're not defending them. Some of them are scummy.
Some of them are scumbags.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. Yeah. But make the charges real. So you go in with this information. All HIV related charges dropped. That's exactly how honest and effective HIV testing is. You can walk in, present the medical, technical literature. All you have to do is write a brief, get the prosecutor to look at it and go, wow, we're going to let that part go.
Well, and it's fascinating because if you tried to take this up within the academia or blogosphere that the academia controls, including even Wikipedia, you'll lose because they can, as Clark said, the government doesn't answer directly under oath, and they have people that can lie, obfuscate, just challenge you based on credentials, but never answer the charges. In a court of law, they actually have to reference facts and defend those facts, and they have no defense against what we're going to share with you this hour on the Robert Scott Bell Show. Clark Baker from the OMSJ is our guest, and Liam Sheff is here in studio as well, and we're going to rock your health world because we have to for freedom, liberty, and for scientific, let's say, the facts, ma'am, just the facts. RobertScottBell.com for all the links, LiamSheff.com. I've got the links up to OMSJ as well, and I appreciate you all calling in anytime, 866-939-BELL, 866-939-2355. If you have a story or comment or question related to this or anything else, please do so. NaturalNewsRadio.com, where you can get the email alerts. We're coming right back with more powerful healing after this. All right, we continue on to deconstruct the HIV mythology here and letting the courts do it for us, in fact. And Clark Baker's doing a bang-up job in there. I mentioned that some of these clients are not the greatest, maybe, human beings as far as whatever, but is that the reason you choose them? Why do you choose the people to defend? What's the real purpose here, Clark?
Well, not all HIV defendants are scummy. I mean, we do have a lot of lowlifes that we're helping out. However, the reason we're involved in these cases isn't to help defend a pedophile or anything like that.
Right.
Our objective is an indictment against these clinicians who falsely claim things as fact.
Sure.
And so while the prosecutors are prosecuting factually innocent people when it comes to HIV, we have nothing to do with any of the other related charges. That's between their other attorney.
And I want to add something here for people to have a perspective. Let's say you have a husband and wife involved in a divorce. And, they could be just, the angriness of a divorce. This happens all the time. And one of them tests so-called positive on this HIV test. Then suddenly now you've got a case where you could end up throwing one of the spouses into the prison for now some kind of criminal act.
It's worse than that. It's worse than that. The prosecutor who prosecuted the Aiken, South Carolina case in 2009, she prosecuted a teacher who was accused of spreading HIV to his wife. Obviously the wife thinks that the husband is fooling around. The husband isn't sure where he got it, and so there's distrust. There's acrimony. They got divorced, and he went to prison for 6 years.
So what I'm saying is not at all an exaggeration. In fact, what is real is even more amazing.
It is a horror. We take these cases so that we can force clinicians to come in and testify under oath. We aren't there to defend a bad guy for any of the other things that he may or may not have done.
And when one charge is dismissed, the other charges are not dismissed. So if somebody had sex with a teenager or something like that, they're prosecuted.
There are real criminal actions that are not.
They're prosecuted for that.
They're not absolved of those things.
Right, but they're not prosecuted for spreading something that they never had.
Right.
So what you're doing is actually providing something closer to justice.
Aiken, South Carolina case, which just happened. By the way, I have the links up to the article at OMSJ, the Office of Medical and Scientific Justice, and Liam has some personal direct involvement, interaction with the lawyer in this case. But this is an amazing story. You just brought it up, Clark. Jason Alexander Young supposedly exposed 6 women to the deadly, as they quote-unquote, HIV virus that can't be found. And so they went after him, with the full extent of the law, as they say, to try and put this guy away.
The case was so solid. First of all, as I mentioned, the prosecutor, Brenda Brisbane is her name. She had a successful HIV prosecution before in her earlier case against the teacher. In this case, you have 6 women who allegedly endured something akin to a man pointing a rifle and firing and missing 6 women. Allegedly they had photographs of him having sex with at least one victim. They had 4 physicians, including the MD who helped to write the HIV testing policy and legal policies for the state of South Carolina. They had an alleged admission by our client, and they had lab tests and everything else. They had a dead bang case. And as the prosecutor, as the defense attorney told us later, without OMSJ, we wouldn't have gotten the deal that he got.
So the defense attorney, Aaron Walsh of Walsh Law in Aiken, South Carolina, took the case, was contacted by the OMSJ, and worked with the OMSJ to prepare a brief. In other words, Clark and his investigative team provided the HIV testing literature, the materials needed to cross-examine the prosecutor's expert witnesses. Then the attorney, Aaron Walsh, was able to write, what would it be called? Clark knows the name. I can't remember it. A brief or a memo or some such thing to present to the court. This to present to the other side. This is presented. The other side looks at it and goes, "Wait a second. Okay, we're gonna let these HIV charges go, and what we're gonna do is offer a plea deal." Now it turns out that the guy in question, the guy being charged, Jason Alexander Young, didn't have, let's say, a high likability factor for court, so they decided to take a deal. In other words, the jury or the judge is probably going to make some of the decision based on how somebody appears to them. Are they smirking? Are they smart ass?
Smarmy, maybe?
Are they smarmy? Are they disrespectful? Yeah. Or really, do they really not have the greatest intentions, and they were trying to do something that was sort of lousy? They just actually got caught up in something bigger than they were. Mm-hmm. So they decided to take the deal. This guy was going to get, well, I'll let Clark tell it. This is the deadly gun. He was going to get
70 years.
Clark, he was going to go to jail for the rest of his life.
Yeah, he's 30 years old. You get a 70-year charge. If he was forced to take the medication in prison, it would have been a life sentence.
Yeah. So in this case, evidently it never went to trial. We thought it was going to go to trial. What did you submit that was so, let's say, damning for the prosecution's potential witnesses, doctors, experts on the HIV test issue, that caused them to back down and go, whoa, we don't want to try this?
Well, I don't know what the prosecutor's mindset was. No one contacted me from the prosecutor's office, nor should they have. However, you would think that if this was a case about a man who fired a rifle 6 times at 6 different women, they would not offer what's called an Alford plea, which allows a person to plead guilty just for the sole purpose of accepting a plea bargain. He didn't even have to admit that he was infected with HIV, which was what these 4 medical doctors were prepared to testify to until we expressed that we were planning on impeaching all of them. And
he walked out with a sentence of a number of years that is, he's actually up for parole in a month, in December, a month and a half. So, in other words, the guy had sex. That was his crime. He apparently lied about something that wasn't true. He might not have known that it wasn't true, but it's not true. So he went from 70 years to walking out in December. In other words, HIV tests, even under these circumstances, don't hold up in court. Now, I'd like to, and again, I want to thank the defense attorney, Aaron Walsh of Walsh Law in Aiken, South Carolina, who said to me, let's see if I can find this, that he would, if he could ever get an asymptomatic antibody-reactive person, he said he'd try the thing all day long. In other words, he's so confident about the miserable nature of these HIV tests, he'd love a case to fall into his lap, maybe where the client was a little more likable, and maybe not this kid who really wasn't presenting the best face, but somebody like this poor guy in the divorce who's in jail for what, 6 years, you said, Clark? Yeah, he went to prison for he was sentenced for 6 years in 2009. So he's probably up for parole maybe next year or the following year. Is there anything we can do for him? Well, if somebody's listening who knows about the case, we contact him. He needs to contact an attorney. He probably has a decent malpractice claim against the clinic that falsely claimed that he was infected with HIV. And I would imagine that if every single patient who was found to be HIV positive in Aiken, South Carolina, they all probably have a pretty good class action lawsuit against these clinics that made these false diagnoses. And I think the fact that these 4 doctors couldn't testify under oath about these facts, that's something that every so-called HIV positive patient should consider in the area of Aiken, South Carolina. In that area, and really anywhere in the country, what you need to do if you have one of these Fakakta HIV tests is go get a lawyer, have the lawyer contact the OMSJ and say you'd like to participate in a class action lawsuit. Mm-hmm. Get your records together, and let's figure out how to take this to court. Now, the case prior to the Aiken case was the case of a Corporal R.L. We're going to just use his initials, and maybe when we'll get a little bit way into it, but we're going to hit a break. When we come back, if this isn't interesting enough to reduce 70 years to a couple of months, the Corporal R.L. case, weren't all charges dismissed, Clark? All charges were withdrawn. Just withdrawn. Which means he can be recharged, but he was scheduled to go to trial on October 31st, and they just withdrew all the charges. Yeah, there's an article here, OMSJ recognized in USMC, the Marine Corps case. We're going to talk more about that. Clark, has the OMSJ taken part in any of these cases that actually went to trial where the so-called doctor, professional, HIV expert witnesses were impeached on the stand? We've had 4 cases where we either deposed or cross-examined someone on the stand, an HIV expert. 4 of those. We've never had a full trial because as soon as they realize what's up,
the prosecution surrenders.
Fascinating discussion here today on the Robert Scott Bell Show. We're talking with Clark Baker of the Office of Medical and Scientific Justice, and it's omsj.org. Liam Sheff is with us today, of course, and covering a subject that is not covered anywhere else in this way in the old media, just right here on the Robert Scott Bell Show. I'm grateful for both of them to be here today to do this. If you know anybody subjected to this so-called HIV test and the prosecution that may follow, the OMSJ is a fantastic resource for you. If you'd like to support their efforts as well, we have the links up. And we're going to take a quick break here on the Robert Scott Bell Show. Remember, robertscottbell.com, all the links up to the articles on the OMSJ, as well as Liam Sheff. And, the Marine Corps, man, they tried to take on somebody and they've dropped or just stopped it. We're going to find out more about that case as well with Clark Baker and Liam Sheff right here on the Robert Scott Bell Show after this. We're about to get more into the case the United States Marine Corps had against one of its soldiers, so to speak, and one of the Marines there, and how they dropped it or just stopped suddenly. But before that, I want to reference back to the Aiken case in South Carolina. I mean, this is a small, sleepy town outside of Augusta, Georgia. That's where they hold the Masters every year. That's why anybody would know that area. And, a southern town like that, I mean, it's like news travels fast. It goes out throughout the whole community. It's not like a big city of hundreds of millions, much less 10 million or 5 million or even 1 million. And, when this case broke, Clark, in Aiken, this was major news in the newspapers, was it not?
Absolutely. In a place with a population like that, you lose your cat and it'll get on the news.
Yes, so the little old lady calls cat and the fire department. And that's front page news there.
That's right. And in this case, in January, February, when he was arrested and charged, and women were asked to call in and talk about this dangerous predator when they were building this case, it was huge news. The news now, part of the story is that this guy who allegedly threatened the lives of 6 women was cleared. That's part of the story. The other part of the story that is quite telling is how the media characterized it. There was no fanfare or hoopla about him being cleared of these charges.
Six felony charges.
6 felony charges.
Gone.
6. I mean, think about it. A man takes a rifle and tries to kill 6 women. They're not going to settle this kind of thing, but that's exactly what they did in this case. And the news media, all they could do is say he copped out to 2 charges.
And it was like not a front page story anymore, even.
The story is dead, and I don't know the political connections of Strom Thurmond Jr., who happens to be Aiken's chief prosecutor.
Interesting.
But I would imagine that Strom Thurmond Jr. Probably has enough connections to keep the story quiet.
Probably received a note from the local medical authority. 34 out of 34 cases have results similar to this, exactly like this, or with charges, HIV charges being dropped completely. And if you go to omsj.org and you look at the Innocence Project button at the top, you can read about every single one of those cases. The one prior to this one was the Corporal RL case, in which a Marine corporal was accused of, and I'll just let Clark tell the story and the result. The result is that the U.S. Marines on their private server have an entirely different view of HIV criminal law than you would think that they would. Why? Because, again, of the work of the OMSJ, but I'll throw it to Clark.
Yeah, a few months after Sergeant Gutierrez was convicted in Kansas and went to prison, and we started working on the appeal in that case, we got word out to military officials in Southern California and elsewhere about the case. And it just happened that one of the local investigators happened to glance on the desk of one of the defense attorneys at 29 Palms and spotted a case file of a Marine corporal who was facing life in prison for exposing another service member to HIV. And what struck her, the investigator, was that the Gutierrez case, which was a complete abomination by the U.S. Air Force, those attorneys were either incompetent or they deliberately skewered the case. But that case was being used as a template for the Marine Corps prosecutors to use against Corporal R.L. And so we were notified that
they were throwing everything at this case, were they not?
They not only were throwing everything at this case, but according to the other investigator, prosecutors were very cocky and jovial about how they were going to send this guy to prison.
Well, you were a Marine, or they say once a Marine, always a Marine, but did this take on special significance, being that you're now dealing with the Marine Corps?
Well, again, my concern isn't about individual defendants or what the criminal charges are. OMSJ's objective is to expose what the NIH and the CDC refuse to expose. So I was interested in the case because the stakes were extremely high. This kid was facing life in prison, and if he got an early release, deportation, because he's a resident alien in this country as well. So his life would have been over if he had been convicted.
Yeah, Captain Beck, is he the defense attorney there in the Marines? This Captain Beck?
Yeah, Captain Beck, and there was a major who was also co-counsel on the case. They were both defending him.
Well,
yes.
Captain Beck is this quote I'm going to read from him about the OMSJ. If you're in a situation like this, it's sensational what he wrote. Our success in challenging the HIV issues in our case is largely due to Clark Baker, a former Marine, retired LAPD investigator and licensed CAPI, Baron Coleman, a young civilian lawyer with expertise challenging HIV prosecutions, and other members of Clark's team at the Office of Medical and Scientific Justice, OMSJ. Without them, we would not have been able to effectively challenge the HIV testing, chain of custody, and alleged diagnosis of our client. You should contact OMSJ immediately if you are detailed to an HIV-related case. I mean, this is a pretty strong statement here.
And that went out to every Marine Corps defense attorney worldwide, and we expect it'll probably filter to all of the other military branches in the next week or so.
That's an incredible thing. This has now affected the United States military. They're aware that the HIV thing is essentially a trick, a scam, a Las Vegas three-card Monte shuffle that you can get out of if you simply present the facts. Now, there's a second paragraph in that document that you got off the secure U.S. military Marine server, and it's in your document at the OMSJ. And would you mind reading it?
Yeah.
There's some language in it that I find stunning. Reckless. Look for the word reckless and look for who's being reckless.
Listen to this. Captain Beck concludes in this letter, which is all over the Marine Corps and probably the armed forces everywhere now. They have it on their boards there. An HIV case is not a slam dunk for the government. Get the right HIV experts on your team, and you will probably be able to kill the case before trial. If the government is reckless enough to go to trial, you will probably be able to get a strong win for your client.
Incredible, impressive. If the government is reckless, enough to pursue HIV. In other words, this thing that we say that millions of people have is a reckless thing to pursue anybody legally with.
And it is also reckless against decent law-abiding citizens. I've got a civil case in Illinois going on right now where a decent law-abiding young woman in her 20s was told that she was HIV positive. She started taking the drugs. Of course, she was told that she has to tell all of her boyfriends or her friends who have any potential contact with her that she's infected with HIV. She starts taking the tests. She started to die. She stopped taking the drugs. She recovered, and we have since discovered that it was a misdiagnosis. This is what is happening to decent people. We've got a case in Tennessee where a family is forced to give their children these deadly, toxic HIV drugs or lose them to child services. That's why OMSJ is involved in these cases.
Yeah, you've taken it to another level now, Clark, and I'm glad you did. And this is, this kind of parallels a lot of the stories about the forced medicating, the forced drugging, the forced chemotherapy, the forced radiation, the forced vaccination. Basically, the government utilizing force to enforce, if you will, the medical industrial complex's view on human health and the body. And so it's much bigger than just HIV, although HIV is the latest incarnation of how they utilize this world religion. And yes, I'm calling it that. It's a dangerous death cult of modern medicine to promote its tools. Its tools are very dangerous, very toxic and deadly, and as dangerous, perhaps more so than the prison sentences that they're trying to get on these so-called HIV cases.
In California, AZT is listed by the EPA as a carcinogen and a mutagen, and it's illegal to flush it down your toilet because they don't want the fish to be contaminated. But you can give Retrovir to young black babies, and according to all of the experts who don't want to be cross-examined by OMSJ, that's okay.
It's not okay here. It's not okay to you, Clark, as someone who really has stood up. Anytime you see injustice, you've stood up at the risk of your career, at the risk of a lot of things. And, we credit you a lot. We love you a lot for all that you're doing and standing up in this way. And it's just amazing, the successes. This isn't just a pipe dream. You've really put everything into this, and you are actually succeeding in establishing real justice in a criminal justice system that has lacked justice for a long time.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, but this is an effortless thing. I've always I enjoy preying on predators, and I'm just shocked. And as a former Marine, as a retired LAPD officer, I've worn the uniform for 26 years, protecting and defending this country. I can't believe that my country is doing this to Americans.
Well, this is it. We've got lots more to cover on this. I'm sure there'll be more trials, but maybe less so as the word gets out on the street. And, of course, the so-called pseudo-scientific community that defends this HIV test and testing, they're going to try and find some way to scream and cry in another field. But in court, they are losing, and they are losing badly, which means the people are winning, health is winning, justice is winning. And again, Clark Baker, the OMSJ, omsj.org. Everybody check it out. You'll never know. I mean, maybe you will. Somebody that you know may be touched by an issue like this. And the work that we're doing here, that Clark has done for many years now, and it's really manifesting wonderfully, is something that would save the life of someone who does not deserve what these prosecutors who don't know any better, and they should know better, but they don't, are doing to innocents in this case.
Thank you so much for having me today.
All right, Clark Baker, glad to have you on board. Liam, excellent, great information to get out there.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled with what Clark's doing.
Yeah, and believe me, if any of this went too fast, this will be replaying every 4 hours for the next 24, and then it will be downloadable as an audio file, MP3 free download at the Natural News Radio archives of the Robert Scott Bell Show. Please send this out far and wide. A lot of people's lives are depending upon it. Thanks again, Clark. We'll be right back with more powerful healing after this. Liam, this has been a long time coming to see that the good guys are getting some wins here on this issue. I mean, we've seen some brutality. You've seen some brutality up close and personal on this issue. And to have Clark Baker doing this, a guy, a Marine, a policeman, it's a guy that believes in justice and liberty and all of those things, and tenacious, as he said, this is effortless, right? Is that amazing? For most people, this would be, this is what he lives for. This is an astonishing thing that's happening. And we knew it couldn't happen within the so-called medical, scientific, academic world because they own and control everything. But this is out of their element. This is out of their terrain. They've got no way to challenge those that are being challenged. When they're held up on the stand under oath to defend the HIV hypothesis, the test itself, etc., they fall apart.
They do. They whimper and they cry, and they admit that they don't know what they're talking about. And I've talked to plenty of so-called HIV doctors and experts, and they come up, and I remember actually at one of the Health Freedom Expos, one of these clowns came up to me, and he said, "Oh, well, I think that you're being too hard on the test." And
remember him? Yes,
yeah.
I do.
And I said, "Well, wait a second, Mr. Expert. why is it that you give a test that comes up positive for pregnancy to pregnant women? And he said, well, it's true that there are some cross reactions. And I said, don't waste my time.
Yeah.
Get away from me. You're not winning any humanitarian awards over here. Now, I watched little children be murdered in New York City in the Incarnation Children's Center, and I watched them be killed over and over again because they tested HIV positive, and so they could be used like pincushions for these nasty drugs, these chemotherapy, bone-killing drugs. And they died. Of course they died, and I reported that they died, and then the New York Times said, oh, nobody died, and then a few years later the New York Times said, well, some people died, and then and then they said, but it wasn't due to the drugs. Well, how many people died? 25. No, 55. No, well, actually 200. But it wasn't because of the drugs. They just accidentally, on purpose, took drugs that killed them and accidentally died. Of course it's the drugs. Of course it is. It's absurd and ridiculous. It's like saying that Gary Webb didn't die of the 2 gunshots that he supposedly gave himself for, reporting on the cocaine flooding into the cities through CIA connections. Well, yes, he accidentally brutally murdered himself by shooting himself in the head twice. It's the same kind of ridiculousness. You just don't believe it. It strains incredulity. But when I was writing about it for the press, I remember running into trouble with these idiot editors all the time. I'm using the word idiot a lot today. I guess I have some feeling about this. But I ran into trouble with these idiot editors when I would say, look, I have to include the part. They wanted to say, oh, it's a terrible story. They're using kids in drug trials, but maybe they're saving their lives. I said, wait a second. These kids don't really test positive for everything. You have to include the part where I include literature from HIV test. Oh, well, I don't know if we can do that. And I said, wait a second. What are you saying? I actually had people approach me and say, even the BBC thing, the ACF TV, they wanted to make a movie. They made a good documentary called Guinea Pig Kids, and I said, you have to include the part on HIV testing. It's not complicated. You just open the test packet. You go to the medical literature that says no standards. Comes up positive if you have worms. Goes away when you treat the worms. Nonsense. Oh, well, that's, we can't do that. Bridge too far. Excuse me? What do you mean? You can't tell the truth?
Listen, we have come into contact with many good people, too, in the holistic community that were still under the impression that had never looked deep enough under the surface about the whole HIV issue, that still perceived that they had to, albeit naturally, address this virus and somehow kill it with natural things. And although this is not a toxic approach when you're talking about truly natural methods, the thing is that they were still chasing the phantom. And it was still shocking to them to learn, like what we have learned many years ago and we've been talking about for many years, that there is no phantom. The illusion of the phantom was simply enough. They didn't even need a real thing. This is what gets me crazy when I hear Len Horowitz claim that HIV was made in a lab somewhere in a government CIA plot, right? We've talked CIA stuff, believe me. But there's no phantom. They just needed us to believe that there was something real, and that was as powerful. In fact, it was more powerful because then you could never invalidate it, and you could always manage to talk people into the drugs because the phantom that you couldn't see was going to kill you someday unless you did the drugs, which ended up, of course, fulfilling the prophecy.
All you have to do is convince people that they're haunted by a ghost. How do you disprove that you're haunted by a ghost? It's that example I gave earlier. Let's do it. Prove to me that kittens don't run the world. Go ahead. Kittens run the world. Prove to me that they don't.
I believe they run the world.
Kittens no. You have to take the other.
I know. You're just so stunning. Of course, kittens don't. I can't prove it.
Prove it. Go ahead. Make an argument.
Kittens don't rule the world because they're too furry. No one would ever believe them.
Well, they actually, you don't understand how genius they are. They put us to sleep, and they brainwash us, and we don't remember when they actually pulled the levers of power.
I give up. They rule the world.
You can't disprove a negative.
Exactly.
That's
what it is.
Right. So you go up to these academics, and they can waste your time all day trying to disprove, or whatever the kittens do or do not rule the world. Who cares? These HIV tests don't test for anything. Meanwhile, you got the whole gay community. It's a topic for a different show in this country. Sort of being trapped, sort of trapping themselves in this lifestyle of being handmaidens to the pharmaceutical industry, babysat by and at the same time crushed under the weight of, well, we get our medical care. Well, we go in for the testing. Well, people sort of leave us alone in our communities, unlike when they used to beat us up and defile us. Well, it's not good enough, gay community. It's not good enough. You got to wake up. You've got to get out from under this self-imposed slavery, this exile that you live in. You actually live in it. You go to these places and let people treat you like pincushions, take blood, and then tell you that you're infected with something. Meanwhile, test the validity of the test. Meanwhile, take responsibility for your own health. Stop asking the government to babysit you. I mean it. That's what's been happening. People who now support this industry want the government to babysit them, and that's who's supporting it. I'm not trying to be mean to people who are sick, because I believe you can have chronic, long-term acquired immune deficiency. And I believe that immune deficiency is highly treatable. I don't think that HIV tests progress to AIDS. I think that people who make themselves sick by taking poisons progress to immune deficiency.
Yeah, well said. And that's what we're talking about here, a reality that the pharmaceutical industrial complex cannot handle, cannot stomach, because it dissolves their power, it dissolves their economic base, and literally basically takes their sheeple customers out of the corral, and suddenly they can't bring them back in. Because once you wake up to this reality, you have to be on heavy medication to go back to sleep and pretend that it doesn't exist. And, this relates also to the hepatitis C issue, which, we don't have time to go into in great depth. But I deal with this all of the time in the holistic community, where they're intent on killing another virus that's never been isolated, when we're really dealing with, let's say, hepatic inflammation, viral inflammation, toxicity, nutritional deficiencies. And yes, the natural things that the natural docs are doing are going to help, because they're going to reduce microbial burden anyway. But the point is, then they're relying upon these tests, viral load tests, PCR tests, that don't tell anything about how the patient is really doing. And it's just, I think I mentioned this on the air a week or two or a few weeks ago, of a woman who had, all the money in the world to pay for the tests and such, and was feeling great, utilizing natural remedies, but the viral load counts were high. She felt great, but she's like, no, unless these viral load, it's like the reliance upon these snapshot blood tests or viral load. I mean, again, no validity or no sense of reality. It's like, you're doing phenomenally well. Your digestion is great. Your elimination and bowel patterns have recovered. Your pains, your joint pains are gone. You've got energy again, yet the test is going to tell you you're about to die. Do you believe how you feel, how your body is functioning, or do you believe this snapshot that the pharmaceutical groups have said, hey, this means you're going to die, take this drug?
Well, yeah. I mean, you know what? The Nazis thought Judaism was a contagious disease. You can imagine anything as contagious and then treat it. And you saw how we treated Judaism in Europe. We saw how we eradicated that virus. Come on, this is Nazi medicine. You got to get out of the mindset that you can eradicate something from the body by poisoning people to death. So, Hep C, another scourge walking the land, another invention of the pharmaceutical company for people who are of a certain age, usually in their 50s, who've lived a long American life, which means they've been exposed to drugs, and they have some liver damage, some liver inflammation. You give them a test. Used to be called hepatitis non-type A, non-type B, in other words, non-specific liver inflammation.
Yes.
You now look for non-specific liver signs of liver inflammation using tests that couldn't find a barn in a barn. Never mind a piece of straw in the barn. Never mind a needle in a haystack. Couldn't even find the barn. Well, you get where I'm going. I've had this conversation with people, too. I've had the conversation, look into the PCR, never mind your viral load, how are you feeling?
Yes, thank you very much. And that's the point. What Liam's saying, what I'm saying is here, we genuinely want to help those that are in need, that have real immune deficiency, which we don't argue against that reality, whether it be acquired or developed endogenously due to other things. However, it doesn't matter to us. But the bottom line is, when you know how to heal, you don't have to chase phantoms. You can bring about that healing in so many natural ways. And we don't even want to oversimplify it to just say it's purely physiological toxicity, although that's a huge part of it from drugs or other things. But there are significant emotional components in certain sub-communities, so to speak, or communities out there that are dealing with ostracization. How do you say ostracization? How do you say that?
I'll go with that.
Okay, we'll let it ride for now. We're at the end of the show. Afterwards, I start going abba-da-bee, abba-da-boo, and I made it through another show. Yes, we make them up as we go here on the Robert Scott Bell Show. Thank you, Liam. Thank you to Clark Baker. Thank you all for being here on the Robert Scott Bell Show. We've got lots more healing. Remember, the Healing Revolution tomorrow, Friday.
Stunning show. We pounded the HPV. We pounded the vaccines. We pounded it.
Oh, yeah. Feeling good. Yes, pump you up. All right, we're going to be back tomorrow with some powerful healing. It's the Healing Revolution on the Robert Scott Bell Show on Fridays, as we do every week with Dr. Frank King, and lots more. RobertScottBell.com. Remember this, the power to heal is yours.
The Robert Scott Bell Show.